It's one thing after another. Welcome back to another ECS Build video. Today we are going to be working on my Mark V Rabbit and prepping it for the 2025 Autocross season. Hopefully by the end of it, I'll convince you guys to go out and support your own local Autocross events. Let's dive into it. Before we actually dive into putting parts on my car, I want to go over some of the Autocross classes by showing you the bare minimum parts you can throw on, starting with Street Class. Street Class has the most minimum modifications you can do to your car. Starting with tires, we have a set of Cooper RS3Rs. If you're familiar with our Race 46 series, you will know that we have the RS3 RSs. This is kind of a step down. This is a 260 treadwear tire, and actually I think will complement this car perfectly in an autocross situation. Next, of course, you need to stop. So we have some Hawk HPS 5.0 brake pads here. And last but not least, in Street Class, you can do one singular sway bar. If you're front wheel drive, I really suggest doing a rear sway bar. If you're rear wheel drive, it's usually suggested to do a front sway bar. I have our ECS Tuning adjustable sway bar here, so I have two positions to play around with, which will be perfect for what I'm doing. The next class up from Street Class is Street Touring. This is where it gets a little bit more intense in terms of modifications, but you're limited to only bolt-on stuff. This is stuff like coilovers, like a tune, an intake. Since I already have coilovers on the car, there's not much here in terms of the Street Touring class. I have some Powerflex Black Series bushings. I have some ECS tuning parts like their underdrive crank pulley kit, rear toe arms, and the ECS Tuning two-piece brake rotor kit. So the last two classes I want to talk about are Extreme Street and Street Modified front wheel drive. I'm specifically building this out to be an Extreme Street class car because Street Modified front wheel drive requires you to run Hoosiers, and I don't feel like trailering this to the track. And the other reason I like Extreme Street is because it gives you a ton of freedom when it comes to modifications, like this integrated engineering Manifold. This thing is absolutely beautiful, and it will bump the horsepower up from 170 to over 200 through this 07K. So obviously I'm not just gonna throw a bunch of cool parts on it and not neglect the maintenance. So we have a ton of maintenance items here from Schaffler, Febby, Mila, Liqui-Moly, Hangst, all to maintain this car. Now, a lot of you out there may be wondering, why not use a GTI? Why are you using a Rabbit instead? Well, for one, these things are stupid cheap. You can find these under $5,000 any day of the week. And they share the same rear suspension setup from a GTI, so anything suspension-wise that fits that car fits this car. Plus, the 07K just sounds better and it's more reliable. All right, enough yapping. Let's go throw these parts onto this car. So I just spent the past few days tearing apart my whole rear suspension, even dropping the subframe and unfortunately cutting out some old bolts. We got the rear subframe out of my car, but as you can see, not all of the arms are off. That's because some of the eccentric bolts decided to fuse to the inside of the bushing, so I can't actually get them out without cutting them out. So that's what I gotta do now, and hopefully they come out nice and smooth. One arm off. Finally got these stupid arms out. Jesus. But now that I have everything out of the car and even the old bushings are pressed out of the arms, I want to go through everything we're doing for the rear, starting with the rear sway bar and the rear subframe brace. These are going to be such a huge improvement for a front wheel drive car in an autocross setting, and I'm super excited to have them. After that, we're going to be putting in some new Powerflex Black Series bushings on all the arms and knuckles, other than the toe arms and the trailing arms. The toe arms are actually getting replaced with our ECS adjustable ones, and I'm just using our rear trailing arm bushings because I want to see what they're like, and we have them here. Obviously, since everything's torn apart, I'm going to be upgrading the brakes as well. I have some Hawk HPS 5.0 pads as well as our two-piece brake rotors. I also have a few other goodies that I'll explain along the way when I'm putting everything back together, but there's nothing left to do but to actually put the rear subframe and the rear suspension back together. It is bushing time with the rear of the car, and one of the biggest reasons why I even chose Powerflex Black Series first place is if you remember Scott's E36 upgrade or unload episode, he actually did a very similar upgrade with the rear of his car. And when he was installing them, it was such an easy process that instantly when I knew my car was up next, it was the easy first option for me. So all you have to do is really just lube up a bit of the bushings. Spread that. All you have to do is sort of press it in. This is such an easy process that if you're looking at doing bushings, I genuinely recommend Powerflex. These are super easy to install. So now that we got all the Powerflex bushings in, I gotta work on our rear trailing arms. So we actually have bushings for the rear trailing arms, and we have a whole kit if you're looking to do this at home. I bought the bushings by themselves because I wanted to press it in. We have the tools here to do that. But if you're doing this at home, highly suggest getting the pre-assembled kit. We have a whole assembly team who puts everything together. I was going to try to get it in by hand, but since it's a one-piece bushing, it's easier to press it. And thankfully we have an arbiter press here that can get this job done pretty quickly. And unlike pressing the bushings out, this should be fairly easy to do. Yep, bushing's completely seated. Now that I have the trailing arm and the knuckle on, I want to work on getting the new wheel bearings on because these old ones are really crusty. And honestly, at this point, this is so old and probably original that I might as well just replace it with a brand new part. And that brand new one is right here. Now, I did make sure to clean off the whole hub with a Scotch-Brite pad. Do this so you have a very clean surface when throwing on the new bearing. Now I'm gonna just throw the bolt on there. I'm not gonna torque it down just yet. I'm gonna torque it down when the car is on the ground. At least I'll have everything assembled around it, which is big. All right, so our first modification we're gonna do before anything else is actually our rear subframe locking collar kit. This is to make sure that your subframe doesn't sway or move because these subframes like to move. Case in point, this is the subframe bolt, and when you throw it in, you have that much movement, which is not good. That means your subframe can get out of alignment and then your car's out of alignment. So thankfully we make a really cool kit that's just some locking washers that go on the top and the bottom. So we're gonna install these while we throw the subframe back in. And the kit simply are two little washers here. One is tapered on both ends, the other is flat. Flat one goes underneath, locks into there. This one, the double tapered one, goes on top. So if you bring it down a little bit, slip this on over, and then what it does is it locates itself onto the subframe. So when you throw a bolt in like so, you now have an aligned subframe. Let's talk about toe arms. This is the stock stamped steel toe arm with just some rubber bushings here. There's no adjustment in this. This is literally, this is all you get. I'm upgrading to our adjustable ones because I have been chasing a toe misalignment in the rear ever since I bought this car. And now that I'm doing all this work, I'm finally upgrading to our adjustable ones. And honestly, no matter what point of your build you're at, I highly suggest doing this because these independent rears, while it's very nice when it comes to cornering, suck to get a good alignment out of. This will make your life a whole lot easier. All I do is just line it up relative to the stock one, and I'm gonna throw it in here and we should be good to go. Okay, I already feel the retention rate going down because I've been talking about bushings and torquing down stuff for the past few minutes now, but don't worry, I'll bring you guys back in because I got two cool parts going onto the rear here that honestly every front wheel drive car should have. Biggest thing is a rear sway bar. This is the ECS one, it's adjustable, you have two settings, and I'll explain some of those in a bit, but also have this rear subframe brace. Simply goes on where the sway bar goes and it just adds a little bit of rigidity to the rear. I have our in-cabin stress bar and it helps immensely. You could definitely feel the rear being a little bit more stiff and it kind of wants to rotate a little bit more, but these two additions are gonna make this car just very tail happy, which is great for a front wheel drive car. So I'm gonna throw these on and I'll talk more about the adjustments then later. Sway bar and brace are in. Next, I'm gonna put on the sway bar end links and I'm gonna show you what my thought process is when it comes to the tuning of the rear sway bar. There's a lot of information about sway bars and it's a whole science on its own. In a nutshell, a sway bar is just a spring that tries to keep your car as flat as possible. The ECS one here has two adjustments. You have a front one and a rear one. So the front one is going to be comparable to like the stock length, and that's gonna be more of a softer spring per se. It's already gonna be stiffer than it was because of how thick this bar is compared to the stock one. But if you bring the fulcrum point back a little bit, it's gonna take more force for the spring to react. Thus, it's going to be stiffer. And instead of trying to match sort of front and rear, what I've been told by a lot of front wheel drive guys in autocross is to get the rear pretty stiff so you can promote oversteer. You want the car to rotate around the corner. You don't want the car to sort of follow. Beforehand, I was not getting the car to rotate at all. This did not want to step out. And if you've ever seen a dog like skid its butt on a carpet, that's what the car felt like. What I want the car to do, and what a lot of guys are saying the car should feel like, is you want the whole thing to rotate around the corner. You don't want the front end to rotate and just understeer and the rear sort of follows through. Hopefully this is gonna help. That was a lot of information, and I do suggest you guys do your own research before ultimately figuring out what settings you wanna run, and it's all trial and error. I may hate this setup and go back to the softer setting, but the only way to find out is to actually drive the car. The rear is officially back in and all back together. Everything looks so good up in here. The sway bar with the brace, the adjustable toe arms, everything is up in here. Everything looks good. Now we have to do the same process, but on the front. So before I actually go and install all these parts up front, I want to explain some of the highlights here. One of them being our ECS front sway bar. Most of the time, people do not do a front sway bar in a front wheel drive car because it's really not necessary, but for the level of performance I'm trying to get to, I think this is going to be such a huge upgrade. There's some more cool suspension geometry bits from Powerflex. I have the rear anti-lift and caster rear lollipop inserts. Speaking of more suspension geometry changes, I actually have a product here that is not sponsored that I bought with my own money. This is White Line's Roll Center Correction Kit, and we actually have a video, I'll link it up above here, that shows and explains what roll center correction actually is and why you want to adjust for that. But this is gonna be such a huge change, and this is something I needed to do as soon as I lowered the car. I'm also refreshing some of like the normal wear and tear items. I have new Schaffler bearings for up front, as well as Mila inner tie rods, because if I'm doing this much work, I might as well change the inner tie rods while I'm at it. As you can see, I'm actually reusing my old control arms because I already have the aluminum Passat control arms, which is the perfect OEM upgrade if you're looking for a bit more handling out of a stock car. And I'll explain more about the setup I had before when I go and install these parts. Well, enough talking about the parts, let's actually throw them on the car. I actually lied. We're gonna be starting with stuff on the engine first because we have access to it. So we're going to do a whole refresh of the drive belt system here that drives, you know, your AC, your water pump, stuff like that. Starting with the actual underdrive crank pulley. This is a heavy piece of cast metal. We're gonna be getting rid of it and putting in our ECS light and smaller one. This is both a lot lighter and actually smaller diameter, so it revs a lot nicer. We're also gonna be changing out all the idlers for some Febby Bilstein parts because while I'm doing all of this, I might as well make sure that all the actual bearings in there are running smooth. So this is the part I've been dreading about this front sway bar, and it's dropping the front subframe. So in order to do the sway bar on these cars, you have to drop it. It's not an if, it's a must. Thankfully, our kit comes with all new hardware to replace all the bolts you take out, which is so nice. So all I'm gonna do is drop this and install the new one. Now that we got the subframe down, I wanna show you kind of side by side the difference between the stock sway bar and our sway bar. So the biggest difference is it doesn't really look like there's much, but our sway bar is a 1.5 millimeters bigger than the stock one. Plus you have the adjustability of having different points. So now I'm just going to get rid of this old one. Let's get our new one out of the way, get rid of this. And then we'll install our new one. Back in. So as you can see, there's already an aftermarket pendulum mount and an aftermarket insert in here. This is the ECS one, and the insert is from Powerflex. I did both of these right after we filmed the intro, and I was trying to think of where I wanted to put it into the video, and I think I'm gonna put it in right here. Honestly, the only reason why I'm doing this is because I want the car to feel a lot stiffer, and that's why I'm pairing it with this Powerflex insert. And yeah, they honestly feel amazing. I've been doing a lot of upgrades to this car and not much just normal maintenance. Well, I got two big pieces here, one from Mila, one from Schaeffler that I want to talk about. When I took this car apart, the front wheel bearings literally exploded because of how old they were. So I already knew that was gonna happen. Thankfully, partnered with Schaeffler to get some new wheel bearings. The fronts on these are actually really easy considering there's 4 bolts that hold it in. It's not a press-on bearing. And the best part, Schaeffler bearings come with everything you need to install it. So I have a new axle bolt and all the new bolts that go in from behind, making life so much easier. Then the other thing I have is some tie rods from Mila. So these are the inner tie rods here. Comes with everything you need. These are just super simple, screw them right in. Super excited about some of this stuff. It'll be so nice to have fresh suspension, arms, fresh bearings. This is gonna feel like a whole new car. So in the front suspension of the Mark 5, Mark 6 chassis, you have a simple lower control arm with bushing up here and then what we consider a lollipop bushing in the rear. Now, I already had our ECS ones. Honestly, if this is a daily driver you're trying to build, I cannot recommend these enough. But one thing these don't offer is suspension geometry changes, and that is what I'm after. So Powerflex actually has rear lollipop bushings that are considered anti-lift. From my understanding, that means the control arm, so if you have the front of the control arm here, rear of the control arm here, it actually changes the rear position of it, as well as adding some caster into the control arm as well. This is a great upgrade for performance driving. I don't know about daily drivability. I don't think it would hurt, but if you're looking for something that offers a little bit more than just a bushing, these are the way to go. So we're approaching the final stages of the Autocross Rabbit build here, and I want to discuss brakes a little bit more because I really didn't in the rear. Obviously, you saw I'm running our 2-piece rotors and Hawk HPS 5.0 pads, but I want to explain why I chose that combination. So the reason I'm going with our 2-piece rotors is I'm actually getting rid of some unsprung weight, about 2 pounds per side up front and about 1 pound per side in the rear. Overall, that's around 6 pounds for the whole car, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you take into consideration how heavy the actual stock rotors are, it's going to feel significant. The reason why I chose the HPS 5.0 pads compared to running a track pad is because I actually still street drive this car quite a bit. I enjoy driving it a lot, and that means to get some street miles. I'll actually take this car on road trips occasionally just because I feel like it. So I still want a pad that's going to perform well on the street, unlike a track pad that needs time to heat up and get some temperature in them. And since I'm only focusing on autocross when it comes to this build, I don't need a pad that's going to be super aggressive at super high temps. Brakes are done. we are going to do a transmission mount insert. This is also from Powerflex. And yes, when I say insert, it literally is just an insert. It goes into the transmission mount and gets rid of any slop. And honestly, the transmission mount, as you can see, has a lot of flex. Like, she goes, this is gonna be stiff, like proper stiff. I can already tell this is gonna have like 0 flex.
3 hours later.
The inserts are in. Would I do this again? Probably not with the, what density mount did I do? I did the black series, so this is the stiffest you can go. Probably wouldn't do it again with that. It is kind of a pain to get installed, but once it's in, like, there is no deflection whatsoever in here, so that's exciting. Now all we have to do is throw it back in the car. Today is officially the day where I get rid of this stock intake manifold and throw on this beautiful integrated engineering manifold here. This is the go-to power adder for the 07Ks. And honestly, it's a super, super, super beautiful piece that I think is going to fit the whole engine bay aesthetic perfectly. Not only that, but you get a huge bump in power. I think it goes from like a stock 170 crank to around 200 to the crank. For just an intake manifold is amazing. Without further ado, let's get this intake manifold installed. Lift right on out. Before I actually install, I want to show you these pieces sort of side by side. This is the stock one. It's big, plasticky. It's not a good intake manifold design compared to IE's, which has a much better flow. And the best part, I don't know if you're going to be able to see into the inside of there or not, but there's actually little velocity stacks per each cylinder. So a lot more airflow. I'm super excited for this, so let's get these parts moved over. Before I can even put the intake manifold on, I need to prep stuff for the actual cold air intake from IE. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, get everything prepped for that intake, and then hopefully I'll be able to do just the manifold like that. I'm simply just gonna slide this down in gently. Here, try not to disrupt those O-rings. So after a whole afternoon of heartache and troubles, everything's so tight. Am I using the right bolts? That's fun. That's very fun. That's very fun. You can't get this. This is like impossible. Ugh. What is this? Where's the 5? There it is. 2 people. You need 2 people for this job. It's one thing after another.
So it is, dog.
I'm afraid I am actually losing my mind. I finally got the IE manifold in, and it looks fantastic. It looks really good. But I am running into another issue where, as you can see, the intake's not connected. I need a piece off of the stock intake system to make that work. Super easy, I just have to go home and grab that. But I'm actually going to stop here for today and come in tomorrow on a Saturday to finish the rest of this car, because all I have to do are coil packs, an oil change, put everything back together, and then I can start this up for the first time. I actually have our coil packs right here, red top ones. These guys just look awesome and they perform a little bit better than stock, so I'm gonna throw those on as well as some spark plugs. And then for the oil change, I have some liquid moly gen and a Hanks filter. Moly gen specifically because this is just great to be able to find leaks if there are any. And unfortunately, the higher mileage this car gets, the more leaks there are to be likely. Nothing catastrophic, but if, say, valve cover gasket is starting to leak, I'll be able to find out with the Moly Gen. 5W40, not changing the weight. This is stock weight of the oil. Honestly, great product. So Gonna get through all of this, get the spark plugs changed, and we'll have a good car. Old oil out, in with the new. This is the first start without a tune. Auxiliary works. I mean, it started right up, so. Whoa, before we actually get into the first driving impressions of this car, there's one thing that keen viewers have noticed that hasn't been put on this car yet, and that is wheels and tires. The tires I introduced at the beginning of the video, but if you forgot, these are the Cooper RS3Rs. The wheels, on the other hand, are an offering from APR. I know APR is very well known for their tunes, but not a lot of people know that they actually offer wheels as well. This is a set of their A02s, and honestly, I think this face design is going to complement the Rabbit very well. You may also be wondering why the wheels and tires aren't on the car right now. Well, it's because it's the middle of winter here in Wadsworth, Ohio, and honestly, running a tire like this in the middle of the winter is a no-go from me. You're actually going to be seeing these two in action in a later episode where I take this car out to an actual autocross and get to test all the parts. But for now, let's get back to the first driving impressions and see how well this car actually performs. So one of the big things when building a car from almost the ground up is you have to take the car out and drive it. You have to see what that car feels like after all those modifications. First roundabout here. Let's see how this car does. Oh my God. It just wants to rotate. It just wants to rotate. This thing just wants to scream and it just wants to go. This intake manifold and the tune that goes along with it awakens the car to such a great level. And all these bushings and those sway bars just make the car feel so planted to the ground. I am genuinely impressed with everything that I put on this car. I just want to thrash on this car. I'm still shifting at my usual red line. Feels so good. It feels so good. The rear is rotating. The rear is rotating. Just the handling feels so good. So good. So good. I love this car. I love this car. One more pull. Sounds so good. We didn't do anything very flashy when it comes to this build. Everything was bushings and just sway bars. Yes, I did the intake manifold and that's awesome. And it's a beautiful piece. But a lot of the stuff around it you may think isn't as interesting as doing a turbo or new wheels or coilovers. But they're important. And it's what makes the car that much more enjoyable to drive. The modifications that seem to be the most boring actually can be the most fun. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode where we take this Mark V Rabbit out to its first autocross.